Trackspacer 2. This is a very talked about plugin recently, and lately I've actually been getting a lot of advertisements for it, and I decided to take it for a spin. And I thought it came at the right time because I've been talking a lot about frequency masking, which is a very common problem that a lot of us engineers and people mixing records are dealing with. Even if you're somebody mixing your own stuff at home, I guarantee that you're encountering this problem of frequency masking somewhere in your own arrangements. Now in today's video, I want to talk all about Trackspacer 2. I want to give you the lowdown, the goods after I've been playing with it for a bit, and I want to show you how you can use it to not only fix frequency masking, but also just achieve cleaner and more balanced mixes. So if you saw my frequency masking video series and were curious to learn if there was something that could do this for you automatically, I think I've found it. We're going to talk about it in today's video. Are you ready? Let's go. So let's talk about this Trackspacer 2 plugin. I've been really getting a lot of good use out of it recently, and I find it to be a very simple and automatic addition to your arsenal because it's pretty economical. It's about a third of the price of the FabFilter Pro Q3, which I use for my recent frequency masking series of videos. If you want to watch those, I definitely encourage that you do. You could check it out. I'll leave a link up above or down below in the description. Now, the problem with the FabFilter Pro Q3 is that there's a lot of steps to set it up and get it going. You have to kind of know what you're doing, and you have to manually set things up, manually create dynamic EQs, all of this stuff. Whereas the Trackspacer is basically a way to automatically do this. It's got very simple controls. It's very intuitive, and so far I've been getting great results. Don't get it twisted. I definitely use both plugins, but they each have their own unique purpose, and I definitely think they both help cure the problem of frequency masking and also just making more space between elements that are ultimately clashing with one another. I'm going to show you how to do this in the context of a session, but before we get into that, I wanted to ask if you could please like and subscribe to the channel, hit the bell button down below, and at the end of this video, leave me a comment if you like what you saw, and let me know what you want to see in the future. I do this 100% for free, and I drop a video every single week, usually on Thursdays, focused on music recording, basically how to sound better and how to make more money with your music. If you want help with these two key areas of every person's career, definitely subscribe to the channel so I can help you with that. Now that being said, let's get into this session here and let's talk about the Trackspacer 2 and how it stacks up. So I got this session here, and you might recognize this from my frequency masking series of tutorials. This is Sorry. It's called Above the Bar, and I thought I'd use this because I think it's going to be a good session to compare the Trackspacer 2 sound with the FabFilter Pro Q3 sound. They're ultimately going to be solving a similar problem, being frequency masking, but they're going to do it in their own unique ways, and I want to see how they each sound. And right now, it's a kick and a bass. We're going to focus on the kick and the bass only. And as you can see, I already have my Pro Q3 set up, but what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to get rid of them both. I'll bypass them. And what you want to do with the Trackspacer is you want to take it and you want to put it on one of the conflicting sounds. So in this case, the kick and the bass, very common that these two sounds are going to clash and get in the way of each other. They both live in the low end. They live in the basement. They're sharing an apartment down there, and they're fighting all the time. You know what I mean? So we got to get them into their own space and not be in each other's face so much, right? So the Trackspacer is really good for that. So I'm going to take the Trackspacer and I'm going to put it onto the bass directly. And the first thing you got to do when you put it on, and again, we're only putting it on one of the conflicting sounds, in this case the bass, you want to set the key input. It needs to have a side chain in order for it to work. So I'm going to set this key input to recognize the kick side chain that I've created. So now that I've got that set up, what's going to happen is when I play this, you're going to see some stuff happening, and if I dial the amount up, it's going to essentially reduce the frequencies, and you're going to see some frequencies are coming down more than others. That means that those frequencies are probably living in the same space, and there's a lot of both of them on both sounds, so it's deciding to take it away even more from the bass in this case. In other words, the kick is causing this to reduce the bass frequencies that are just too much and overlapping and creating some masking. So let's just set this up like that, really simple first, and then we'll talk more intricately about these other features that it has. So as you can see, there's the white line that's essentially showing a reduction of volume for the bass, and at the same time there's a blue line which is actually showing you the sidechain trigger, being the kick in this case. So every time the kick hits, this plugin is essentially reducing the amplitude, the volume of these problematic frequencies that overlap. It's reducing it by a little bit. All right. And I can increase this by dialing up this amount, or it says ratio here, but it says amount down here. So if I just increase this, you're going to see I'm going to make this even more aggressive. Here, you can really hear this pumping sound in the bass, right? If you're not sure, let me just solo the bass and take this in. Hopefully that makes sense, but you can see when I have this down to 0, it's not doing anything, and when I crank it up, you're seeing a lot more reduction taking place. You're hearing the pumping and all that stuff. So far so good. We're obviously going to use this ratio amount to increase how much reduction is taking place, essentially create more space for the other track, the kick in this case, right? Now, the other thing that this plugin has is a low and a high cut filter. So you may decide that you don't want to have the entire frequency range, which is basically the default setting. You may decide that you don't want that whole frequency range to duck, because as you notice when I increase the ratio here, or the amount, it not only reduced the lows, but it also started to reduce the highs. And you can see as I take my mouse and hover it around here, you're seeing exactly which frequency it's corresponding to in the top right. So you may decide that you want to focus. So for example, let's say that I just wanted the low end of the bass, let's say from about 200 hertz. Here's 211 I've sidechained off here. Let's say just this area is going to get reduced by the kick. Okay, so let's check this out. So that's pretty cool. I just wanted to solo it so you could hear, how is it sounding? And it sounds pretty natural in some ways. It's somewhat like noticeable. You could definitely hear it if you really pay attention, such as when I soloed it. But at the end of the day, you could see it's just reducing the low end of the bass, making sure that the low end of the kick comes through in this particular case, and then the high end is left untouched, right? So kind of like a multi-band compressor, sidechain compressor in a way, right? Now, if you remember from the previous lesson, I pretty much just got rid of 45 hertz, so anywhere from 13 to 150. So if I wanted to set this Trackspacer up to be basically the same, so I'll set the low cut as low as it is, which is 20, and I'm going to set this to about 150. I'm going to just solo the bass for a moment. Let's just see, how do these two sound? Do they sound comparable, right? So one is a FabFilter Pro Q3 that's manually reducing the same range, right? And I've set it up with the kick, all the same stuff from the same settings, basically, from the previous video. You can watch that if you want to see. And I'm just going to A-B it and see what it sounds like. So here we go. Let's get the same loop. Here we go. All right, so I'm gonna just point it out because you might be thinking this yourself. The FabFilter sounds smoother, and I agree. It does sound smoother. It's less noticeable, right? Trackspacer definitely has some movement. Well, let me show you some. If you press this blue button here, you can now adjust the attack and release. So I could actually create a much slower attack and maybe a quicker release, or maybe a slower release, depending on what I want to do, right? I can also solo the sidechain by clicking here, but let's just focus on the attack and release here. So I'm going to now just play this and try to set it up. And of course, because I want to actually hear this in context with the kick, I'm going to put it back in, because at the end of the day, I'm soloing things for you to hear it, but I ultimately do want you to make these decisions in context because that's how your end listener is going to consume the music, of course. Let's play with these settings, see if we can get a bit of a smoother sound. Way smoother. You don't really hear that pumping anymore, right? So obviously the advanced settings, super clutch and key for this situation. And as you can imagine, I'm getting rid of a very small amount, 12%. As a pro tip, I find using this plugin, I'm pretty much never jacking the amount up. It's usually 15% or less. Some of them it's like 5 to 6%. You know what I mean? I find that's very, transparent, not so noticeable. And that's what I want with these kinds of plugins, because you don't want to just totally kill the other sound. You just want to create some more space, right? So let's check this out here. I'm going to put this in context now. So now let's do an A/B. Let's compare it without it and with it, and let's just see, does the kick come out more? Definitely, I would say so. The kick definitely just becomes a little bit more pronounced, right? And we're only really doing this on the low end, but if I wanted the kick's high end to cut through a little bit more, I can obviously extend the high cut. In this case, I'll keep it pretty focused, but I just wanted to point that out, right? You got to play with the variables in the context of your song. So the next thing I want to do is I want to just compare these two plugins. I want to shoot them both out between the Trackspacer 2 and the FabFilter Pro Q3. And the truth is, we're doing this just for our own experimental purposes to, see what sounds better for fun. At the end of the day, whatever tool you have in your arsenal, use that. And like I said, this Trackspacer is pretty cheap. It's a lot cheaper than the Pro Q3. And if that's all you have access to, it might be worth, using that instead of obviously shelling out $200 or whatever it costs for the Pro Q3. I definitely advise having both. That's why I have them. But I'm also just trying to show the, financially minded people, the frugal people. Sometimes I'm Dr. Frugal myself. That you don't necessarily need to have all the most expensive fancy tools to do this. Anyways, after all that gibby gab, let's check this out. I'll play with the Trackspacer, and then I'll switch and put the Pro Q, and let's just see how different are they, if they're different at all. At the end of the day, we're just trying to make sure that the kick is coming out more on top, more dominant, more prioritized over the bass. All right, so Trackspacer first. I'll put the Pro Q3 in afterwards. Here we go. So that's very interesting. I know that was a bit of an extended play there, but I really wanted to just make the right, judgment here. And they both have their pros and their cons. In fact, both of them are adding their own unique flavor, and I like them both equally, just in different ways. Again, the difference is very subtle. Like if you only had access to one or the other, you could obviously make either choice here, but it's about when you have access to both, or if you're deciding, should I buy this extra thing? You know what I mean? In my case, I think that the Trackspacer actually sounds a little bit more musical and transparent, whereas the FabFilter sounds a little bit tighter. All right, so that doesn't necessarily mean one is better than the other. It just, again, is pointing to the different flavors or characters between them. And this really goes to show you that with mixing, there's like 15 ways to do something. You just got to pick one way and commit to that. You know what I mean? So I could definitely live with just leaving the Trackspacer on, especially if you're more of a budget conscious person that doesn't have, the more expensive toys, Or if you have both this and the Pro Q, you may end up relying on the Pro Q over this. It just depends on your preference and what you like, or really what you reached for first. I find myself reaching for the Trackspacer first more and more, and as you can see, it's a very simple interface, just 3 knobs, right? An amount/ratio, a low cut and a high cut, so you can really zero in on the specific frequency. I didn't talk too much about this freeze functionality. It's a cool button. You can essentially freeze and have the Trackspacer make that move the entire time, from what I understand, but I don't find myself using it that much. And as you can see, the advanced panel is obviously coming in handy here, using the attack and release, especially to really tighten things up and get the right response from the Trackspacer. End of the day, it doesn't matter what you use, just use the tools at your disposal, and hopefully you'll come up with a better result. It's really about what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to make space and prioritize sounds. I'm sure you get that by now. I'm not going to beat it into your heads, but I hope you got value out of this in the meantime anyways. Appreciate you guys for watching. Once again, if you can, please like and subscribe to the channel. Smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm so more people see my content, and that ultimately allows me to make this content for you 100% for free more frequently. The more likes I get, the more videos I'm going to drop, and I appreciate you guys for watching once again. You got any questions, leave them in the comments below so I can help, and I'm looking forward to helping you guys again soon. Peace.
5